A little over 400 years ago, African slaves were brought on ships. These people had been strangers to each other. They were brought on ships to the coasts of where we now call the United States of America to be traded as property for white plantation owners primarily to use to raise their crops or farm or earn money in whatever way they were needed. In the podcast 1619, which recognizes this tragedy of American slavery, it talks about how these people were strangers, but they had been forged and bonded together through this unique experience, and they had been made to understand themselves as black by people who considered themselves white. See, it starts with this understanding that these two things, these black and these white, used to not be so separated. But you now understood yourself as black because of the way in which you were treated, the way in which you were frankly owned. February is Black History Month, and here at Wesley, we're going to do a short 4 to 5 week study on the 1619 podcast. This is a podcast that came out a couple years ago to recognize the 400 years that have passed since American slavery was a thing, but also to reframe the narrative. I don't know how many times you've been in a conversation with somebody, right, who says, well, why am I being persecuted because of my skin color? Because I'm white, right? How many times have you heard this idea of reverse racism? How many times have you heard this comparison between black or white, or somebody says, why can't we all just be considered equal? And the truth is that there is a lot of history behind that. And that conversation, particularly for white people, which we as Wesley are, that conversation is essential. And so what we're going to do over the course of the next 4 to 5 weeks is we're going to talk about what it means to be a white person, to have lived into another story, not one of our own making. We didn't have slaves, but we are a part of this system that has been built up, that we've been, enabled by power and privilege. And if this makes you uncomfortable because you want to disagree or because of the politics of it, you probably need that conversation just as much as anybody else. And so I want to invite you to come have that conversation with us. And I promise you it will be uncomfortable. I promise you it will be difficult. We are going to meet on Mondays at 4 p.m. And I want to use this Monday motivation to inspire you and hopefully recognize February is Black History Month, but also invite you into a conversation where we could learn from each other and we could learn what God is going to do in us. And we're going to talk about how the church has been sinful in this, but also could be the step toward holiness in this reconciliation, this important reconciliation. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, let me just ask you to send us a direct message. If you'll just send us a direct message here on Instagram, we will make sure that you are included in that conversation. I think this is going to be important conversation as we study the 1619 podcast. Thanks and have a great week.